Today we have Nico, the founder and CEO of Default, the B2B platform that is automating manual workflows that are killing your pipeline. At LeanScale, we work on a number of lead, contact, and account routing projects, and they tend to get really complex. What gets us excited at LeanScale about Default is they've made the process really easy with point-and-click solutions. And they have pre-built integrations such as Apollo, Clearbit, Salesforce, and HubSpot. They've done a really good job of combining calendar booking functionality with a very robust routing system. Their vision is to become your default go-to-market platform, and they're working to further develop functionality in territory and capacity management. In the full episode, Nico shares his founding story, demos the product, and shares all of the exciting things they have on their roadmap. All right, today we have Nico, founder and CEO of Default.com, here to walk us through the B2B platform that is reducing manual workflows that are killing your pipeline. Nico, super pumped to have you here. I think your platform is one of the easiest platforms to manage lead routing and other flows that are really crucial to your go-to-market, and can't wait for you to go through it.
Yeah, same here. I'm pumped. Joe, Anthony, thanks for having me today. Excited to dive in.
You bet. Well, before we hop in, we're talking to the founder. So I'd love to hear what inspired you to get Default started, and what gave you the drive to get it going, and what gap did you see in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we started building Default about 3 years ago. It was a very, very early seed of a really big vision. And when I was in college, I sort of did this did a brief stint at a company that had been, they'd sort of gone through the PE acquisition process. And I did the sort of like non-conventional internal track where like I started in engineering, did that for a little bit. And then I moved over just by virtue of like befriending the guy who ran the biz dev org. I moved over onto the business development team, and I wasn't doing much business development. Honestly, I was doing what I would now call like more like RevOps, and started off sort of talking about how to sort of build like a unified sales process. Is like the PE playbook is super aggressive growth. A lot of it via acquiring other companies that all have their different sales processes and different CRM instances, different marketing teams, etc. But from there, sort of, us as the parent company is starting to build out these unified systems, right? This unified go-to-market architecture, and starting with very, very low-hanging fruit. So for us, at the time I was working there, I think the company was grand total probably 1,100 people, roughly 400 million of revenue, and growing upwards of 20% year over year. So growing really, really quickly, adding hundreds of employees per year. And, as I said, I was starting with all these like low hanging fruit problems. So a lot of it initially was sort of refining our like RFP sales process, right? And a lot of stuff like that. But later on, I kind of moved into helping our marketing team a bit. And we had a marketing team of two. At the office I worked at, where there were hundreds of employees, definitely very understaffed there. And one of the biggest problems that was raised was this sort of like skepticism around marketing budget, right? So we've got this marketing team of two that's doing just an incredible job of hosting events, going to conferences, different expos, running ads, etc., doing SEO. And we had this marketing agency that was running our website, just by virtue of not having the sort of in-house capacity to run it. I think it was on like WordPress at the time. And this thing that would happen once a month was we would get this CSV from this agency of all these people that should fill out the form on the website. And for our head of biz dev, this guy that had sort of taken me under his wing, he had this sort of skepticism around any of the marketing activities sort of generating pipeline, and he sort of tasked me with going in and taking these CSVs and like throwing them into Excel basically, and sort of like figuring out like who these people are they worth any money, anything like that. And this is pre-Clay, pre-Clearbit, pre any products that allowed you to sort of enrich leads in a spreadsheet. And I was essentially going in and like looking up the domain name of the company, going to their website, looking at LinkedIn, then cross-referencing it with the CRM and sort of seeing like what the average, the total amount of sales either at those accounts that we had already sold to in the past per project, which is how we sold. Per SKU, as we were entering more of a sort of like a la carte kind of business line and business model, selling a lot of different products and entering the software business as well. And it turns out we were leaving like $64 million of revenue on the table every year projected, right? So that was a sort of like earmark moment for me, where I just saw the scale of a problem and like how much money you can leave on the table, even at a really big company, where things are super calcified, people don't move fast, and like I think people are a little more hesitant to take on these kind of problems. It's a lot more about like downside mitigation instead of like upside maximization, right? Which is sort of like very juxtaposed to the sort of PE growth playbook. So yeah, that was a really, really important moment for me, where I just realized we're leaving so much money on the table. And I was pretty young at the time. I think it was like 20, 21 years old, something like that. And later on, my current co-founder and I had actually started a company together, building sort of accounting and billing software for real estate companies. And we'd sort of stitch together like our own like mini Frankenstack. I think this is pre there being a lot of focus on R&D and like better products in the sales and marketing space. So we did the classic like Typeform plus Calendly plus Zapier plus Google Tag Manager, I think plus early Clearbit API access, plus HubSpot plus Customer.io. That was like our stack. And then we had like Google Sheets. And then my co-founder had built this insane tool, just a custom internal tool that let us do like multi-touch attribution based off of a lot of Phantom Buster stuff I was doing, a lot of my LinkedIn DMs, stuff like that. And we'd hard coded a bunch of UTM parameters everywhere. And as we ran that, and as we operated that stack, we realized we were spending a lot of our time sort of fixing these broken workflows. And we sort of ended up violating this really like I think common narrative that you see, especially like investors frame like go-to-market tools and like their potential for upside, which is that we were spending actually like triple what we were spending on the CRM on data and workflow automation. And at the same time, like a lot of our friends are going to these like super fast growing companies like Rippling and Ramp and like Vanta, and they're telling us outbound's going great, outreach, and this is pre-Gong Engage. It was basically like outreach, Apollo, and SalesLoft. Everybody's outbounding, stuff is working. This is like 2020, 2021, and the biggest problem we're having right now is actually like the inbound funnel. Like no one really knows what's going on. No one really knows who's coming to our website. Like we're just spending a ton of money on ads, and like we're getting a ton of inbound, but like if this inbound stops, we won't know what levers to pull to turn it back on. And then we're also building these like incredibly bloated teams to sort of like manage the tools, right? The more tools you need, the more people you need to manage it. Actually, I caught myself like saying this yesterday, as we're like about to bring on like our first like product management, a real like product management tool. And I asked, the guy who's buying it, are you going to manage this tool, or who's going to manage this tool? So, I think the same thing is true in go-to-market. And, I think that a lot of the software bloat and the sort of tech stack sprawl is a really big driver of inefficiency, lack of agility, bloated costs, and general inefficiency in revenue teams, right? You're just buying and stitching together all these tools that like don't really talk to one another. They all got different data models. They all have different approaches to the integration ecosystem, right? Like the classic example I think to use is like outreach versus Groove, right? Like Outreach took a pretty, they were pretty open, and they had a really great like partner ecosystem on the tech side. Whereas Groove, it was really hard to get access to the API and stuff like that, right? So I think there's an interesting bifurcation too, and like the sort of like types of customers you see use different tools like that. But yeah, so when we started Default, we sort of set out with this one question, which is, we're coming fresh off of our last company, um, having stitched together all these tools, and this question that we kept asking ourselves is like, obviously we got to go big for the next one. Like, what are we gonna do? And I remember, at the time, I'm living in this like dingy hacker house in San Francisco with like 13 other guys. Like, we're sleeping on mattresses on the floor, like no bed frames. Like, it's the classic sort of like Silicon Valley, like middle of the pandemic kind of story. I'm sitting there with my co-founder in our living room, and we asked this question, which is, if there is another big like sales and marketing cloud company to build, like if you're going to build the next like system of record or ecosystem for sales and marketing information, right? The sort of like prospect data cloud, if that's true and there is an opportunity to do that, like how might you do it? And as we talked about this for probably 4 hours that day, and we sort of started walking through all the different paths you could take, right? You could start with sort of like CPQ, this sort of quote to cash, like billing thing, and sort of like work your way into forecasting and kind of go maybe up from there. We thought, we're not the guys to do that. Also, we're just not that excited about CPQ. We'd start with outbound and do like some sort of like outreach, maybe Gong, like kind of Clary thing. Again, not something we were super excited about. And then, at the same time, we sort of saw that, Outreach, SalesLoft, Clary, Gong are probably all going to converge at some point. I think Outreach had just bought Gaia. Gong was in the very early innings of rolling out like forecasting and Gong Engage. The third sort of approach that we thought about was like building around the inbound lead funnel, right? And what we thought needed to be true about this business that you're going to build is that you need to build around some point of ingestion in the revenue tech stack, like the GTM tech stack, where information is just flowing through your system automatically, right? You don't need to sort of like sync stuff from Salesforce or HubSpot in, but you're sitting somewhere in the stack where this really interesting information that's very valuable and holds a lot of gravity is flowing through you. And you need to be able to sort of like read and write to and from the stuff downstream, right? But the most important thing is like you need to sit at that point of ingestion, and you gotta run the sort of like integrations race where you're building integrations with everyone, you're building the best workflows, and you're not only sort of simplifying the management of workflows and different motions for the operators of the system, but you also get the opportunity that, as you build more integrations with systems, you sort of know where the data that you're collecting is getting routed to. And if you're super aggressive with R&D, you get to replace the applications that you're writing to downstream, and also sort of build this really fleshed out data model that looks a lot like a CRM, if you sort of squint hard enough around like year 5, right? So
what was that's awesome. What was like the current best practice at the time for some of this?
So the current best practice at the time, I think what we saw a lot of was, these teams that, they were sort of starting to spend a lot of money on marketing, kind of mid-pandemic, right? And as teams grew a lot and sales became, I think a lot of sales in 2020, 2021, maybe even into 2022 a little bit, leaned like super transactional because everybody was buying, right? There was just such a huge spike in demand for software. But the sort of like best in class like stack or playbook that we saw was, you're sort of using a marketing automation platform like HubSpot or Marketo, maybe a CMS like Webflow. And then, you've got a CRM downstream, again, might be HubSpot or Salesforce. And as the sort of sales team complexity grows, you need the ability to sort of understand who you're going to route a lead to at any given time, right? If it's a lead that is already a customer, you probably don't want to route them to an SDR. That's an easy way to ding, goodwill with customers. If it's someone in a certain territory, if they're in EMEA, you don't want to route them to APAC, right? If they're SMB, you don't want to route them to enterprise, et cetera. And there's been this sort of like balance. I think there was this balance at the time around like, people really concerned about form conversion rates and the routing tools that they had, like not really being able to pull in additional data beyond just the routable criteria, right? So we didn't really see very much like routing with enrichment data, for example. Nothing really of the sort. So the classic thing was like you throw like Chili Piper or kind of like lean data into your, either on your website or in your CRM to sort of route these leads once they either fill out a form or a new lead or account are created in Salesforce. And sort of question that we saw on both sides there was, number one, the sort of the DNA of that product you need to build to sort of satisfy both like jobs to be done, like the inbound scheduling use case and the CRM routing use case. It's the same sort of like, product connective tissue, right? But even then in both camps, like, on the CRM routing side, you've got the speed to lead problem, right? Where someone might get routed to the right rep like 100% of the time, but that rep still has to call or sequence that lead to book a meeting, right? So it actually takes you way longer to book a meeting if it's an inbound lead, right, coming in from like a web form or similar. And then on the CRM the web form like sort of demo routing side, you've got all these different transformations and very very deep complexity in the CRM. And all these transformations you have to do with like the objects on the way in, right? A lot of people are not very happy that a lot of the inbound scheduling and routing tools they use only create a lead, right? Because the software might be cheaper, but you end up paying down that cost in building out like Salesforce flows or buying like Cloud Dingo or Lean Data or something else to do like lead to account matching, lead to contact conversion, et cetera, adjacent CRM automations, and sort of also servicing and maintaining those things as well.
Makes sense. Sounds familiar too.
It's a complicated problem to solve, and I think I guess before we hop into the demo, what did you see were the biggest gaps, or what those companies that have gone down that route weren't capitalizing on? And then would love to see exactly how you do it.
Yeah, so there were a couple of trends that we thought, there were a few trends that we sort of saw coming. The first one was we thought that the cost of B2B data was going to go way down. And I think this was directionally correct at the time. And now I think with products like Clay, where they've sort of built like a data marketplace for B2B data from like third-party vendors. You're seeing this happen even more, right? Where like the data is just getting way cheaper, right? Whereas like 6 years ago, you had to buy, Zoom Info for a ton of money every year just to get, decent, B2B data, contact and account data. And now, like, I think especially with the rise of like AI and like web scraping and sort of like headless browsers, like stuff you can do with things like browser-based or like Crew AI, you can just get so much data from different websites, from different, there's people that are now scraping LinkedIn at scale. So the cost of data is going down over time. This is something we thought was going to happen. So we wanted to build the product to sort of let you use your own enrichment data model to either route leads, qualify leads, et cetera, and even use it for things like notifications or sequences. But also at the same time, we knew that there was going to be some sort of explosion of go-to-market tools over the course of the sort of 4 to 5 years after 2020, 2021. And we thought at the time, like, this is early innings of like copy AI. We thought copy AI was like really interesting. We thought there was going to be some cool explosion of like GPT-3. We thought like Outreach 2.0 was going to be some like GPT-3 powered sort of sequencing tool. And we thought that there were going to be a bunch of people that did that. And it turns out a lot of people did do that, but we've also seen a ton of really cool new products pop up. So the thing there is, we wanted to build for like the modern go-to-market tech stack and not like the sort of legacy players, right? Not only the legacy players like Marketo and Salesforce and stuff like that. So we wanted to go really long on integrations and very deep, very early.
Yeah, nice. Makes a ton of sense.
It does. I mean, even like you said, 5-6 years ago, the stack was probably like a fifth of what it is now. I mean, just for one part of a go-to-market, it's probably you're using 5 to 6 tools, systems. So makes sense. And it was really apparent when we first spoke with you that you built for the modern stack. It's tools that we use every single day. So yeah, I'm excited to see it. And I think, everyone's going to immediately get it once they see the integrations that you have in place.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, I'm happy to sort of kick off the demo here, and we can start from the top. That sounds good.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So, our core kind of like bread and butter use case is the inbound automation use case, right? And what we call inbound automation is basically hooking up to the forms on your site and giving you the ability to build all kinds of powerful workflows that handle every edge case. Every time you hear people talk about like lead routing and inbound, they always talk about like, the different edge cases, right? And a lot of this has to do with CRM complexity. A lot of this has to do with making sure that leads get routed to the right person on a more complex, like segmented sales org, or that they get handled correctly if they're like a partner or something else like that, right? And the way we've gotten around this is by building a very powerful workflow engine. And what that workflow engine allows you to do is not only run workflows on that web page, but also run more asynchronous components to this inbound automation use case, right? So the sort of synchronous component here is the sort of classic, contact demo flow, right? So every form on a website looks more or less the same, right? It might be HubSpot, might be Marketo, might be Webflow. But for companies that spend a lot of money on marketing, it's a really huge point of opportunity for them to go in and make sure that they're not leaving any money on the table, right? So at the same time, you don't want to ask too many fields, right? Because you ding your conversion rate. So you want to capture just enough routable data that you can actually do something. In this case, we would probably have some other qualifying criteria, but this is a demo page. What we're doing here is we're just capturing the work email, right? Classic approach of like an earlier stage company. But right here, what we've just done is once that email submission was captured by the default script, what we did here is we actually ran this workflow. And this is the sort of core bread and butter behind default, is this really powerful workflow engine with enrichment data and deep integrations with CRMs and otherwise. But for every new form submission that comes in, what we'll do in this case is we'll enrich with Apollo and enrich with Clearbit. And we'll use some logic here in a logic builder, just like this, to qualify that lead, right? So in this case, if headcount is less than 50 or the country is the United States, we'll check to see if there's a matching account in Salesforce, right? And if there's a matching account in Salesforce, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and book with the account owner, right? So we instantly just sort of pull in the account owner's calendar here and show that on the website. And that's kind of what we saw here on the first page, right? So what happens below that, and this is really interesting thing, this sort of scheduler abandonment component of inbound workflows, right? Again, lots of edge cases. But one of the things that we've done about or built into default's scheduling component is the sort of timer that communicates to the prospect how long they have to book a meeting, as well as sort of listeners, right? So if they close the window, they close the tab, or they close this sort of scheduler pop-up, what we'll run here, wrong window, is we'll run this meeting not booked branch in this workflow, right? And what happens here is, someone came through, they didn't book. What we're going to do is we're going to Slack the account owner here. We'll send them a Slack message, and you can kind of pick what data you include here, right? So if you want to add stuff from Clearbit or Salesforce or otherwise, you can add that here. We'll kick off a SalesLoft cadence from that user's SalesLoft account, which maps to their default user ID. And then what we can do is we can go ahead and update the account, create the opportunity. In this case, this should be existing lead, but we'll check for lead. If there is one, we'll update it to a contact, or create a new one, and we can actually remove that lead as well. So we can do the conversion as well. On these other sides, what we're basically handling here is not only the sort of lead to account owner and like lead to account matching booked within the sort of scheduling workflow, but also the CRM automation that's happening after this, right? So 4 years ago, this would have happened across a minimum of like 3 or 4 different tools. And what we've done here is we've basically given you one canvas that you can use to sort of build these workflows, right? And it just makes it much easier to maintain, just because you've got one place where you can not only test these workflows, right? I can test a workflow here. Um, I can access my version history if I make a mistake or otherwise. I can always customize it more, and build on top of it. I can also look at the logs, right? And the unified logging is a sort of really big component of default workflows because the classic thing that you get as a RevOps manager is your leads or not your leads, your reps complaining that they're not getting enough leads, or reps saying that hey, this lead was routed to me, but it should have been routed to Jane Doe. And essentially what we do here is, in this case, we don't have logs because this is a demo, but what we would be able to do is kind of show you the sort of log and the path that lead took through a default workflow, which is super interesting, gives you a ton of visibility into the paths people take and the errors, right? So where they errored out, allowing you to sort of resolve those errors, and instead of having to bounce between 4 or 5 different tools to figure out what happened, you can just do it with one click from default. So
I think we
that
spent
is
a lot of time on
go
that
ahead.
really quick. That's a big thing. I mean, the amount of investigation work for rerouting
Yeah.
is probably like, I'd say like every day. It's like a daily request
Yeah.
when we're managing this. So that's great. You can kind of just visually see the path it took, and then
Yeah.
figure out, was it a logic thing, or you know be able to debug it a lot quicker, which I think that stood out to us right out the gate.
Yeah, these investigations take hours too.
Yeah.
It's not something that is easy to go get the information you need.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really, I think audit logs and audit logs, if they're done really well, are such a big game changer for the people that maintain these things. And I think what we've seen is that the maintenance of lead routing tools and stacks and just the workflows generally it's expensive, right? It takes hours and hours of time every week, especially in very high volume sort of transactional sales environments. So yeah, it's been a very powerful feature for us, and customers are very happy about it. But the next thing I'll sort of talk about here is the way we do inbound at default as well, and the sort of like way we use it. So I've got our form pulled up right here. Essentially, this is a form that is built on default. You can see it's hosted on a default URL, and this lives on default.com/demo on our website. And what happens is, we'll pass in the email from our email capture field on the website, prompt people to fill out their first name and their last name. We have auto shortening via Clearbit. So if that email in the email field has pinged Clearbit and it's returned first name and last name, they're only going to see work email, which CRM they use, and how big their sales team is as the questions. And then we actually route and qualify it based off of these things. These are sort of primary qualification criteria we use for ourselves at default. So very cool way to sort of like dog food the product. And we actually haven't spent very much money on RevOps. We haven't even bought a marketing automation platform yet, and have more of a composable, I think, revenue stack with everything sort of like flowing in and out of Salesforce, including attribution as well.
Yeah, it's great to see that you're using own dog food, or drinking your own champagne. Might be a nicer way.
For
But
sure.
yeah, I think just using it day to day gives that level of inspiration to find those really nice to have features.
Definitely.
This also looks really easy to put together. So, I mean, building workflows like this, if you're like manually drawing these out, can take a really long time. But it looks really, really point and click. Looks like it's easy to drop in the integrations that you have, and kind of looks like it's just pre-built to be ready to go.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with customers to sort of figure out what are the spots in their current processes where they're potentially losing either revenue, or there's a sort of like big just sort of drawn out like speed to lead bucket, right, where a certain type of lead is not getting followed up to as well. Maybe because an SLA is not being adhered to, which is sort of a classic issue of inbound sales. Folks just not adding leads to sequences, which is typically like a more manual workflow for SDRs, for example, after they do the qualification. And we sort of help them map, the different processes or the different sub processes within this sort of workflow. And then, in that second call during the sales process, we come in and we've sort of got everything built out for them and laid out on this canvas. And we can very easily sort of walk through and say, okay, this is the qualification that, your SDR team does. And we've sort of abstracted this to a logic node, right? And going in from there. And it's typically, very, very straightforward to visualize and, very, very valuable for RevOps teams.
Yep.
Makes a ton of sense.
One thing, and you might have already been planning to cover this, but in addition to like the routing, there's a lot, especially with startups, you're hiring a lot of reps. Some of them go out of office. Some of them get moved to a different territory. All of those things right now, you have to architect in your CRM, and it's in order to provide that logic to most routing tools. I think the way you all did it, from what I remember, was a lot more intuitive and easier to make those adjustments because this is not a set it and forget it process. I think some people think, oh, let's just set up lead routing. It's very much living and breathing. And I think it'd be
Definitely.
really valuable to go through that piece of it if you wouldn't mind, because that's another
Yeah,
thing we deal with
absolutely.
all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think one of the classic issues that we see a lot is, or one of the big questions that we see from people is, and it's a sort of like subtle tell, right? Is a manager or an admin will reach out to us and say, I've got like 3 reps going out of office over the next couple of weeks for the holidays. In the system we used before. They had to go in and sort of like manually toggle it, and like I couldn't do it myself, or we had to rely on like Google Calendar or something like that to sync properly, and like really good calendar management, right? Which I think is also an under discussed part of sales, is just actually, having a playbook for managing your calendars, managing your team's calendars as well. But for us, what our approach here has been, and I'll sort of dig into where we're going here as well a little bit more. Letting either you as the rep come in and toggle your vacation mode, as well as your working hours, and setting like, buffers and notice periods and whatnot for yourself, or as the admin, which, I'm the admin here in this workspace, being able to go in and sort of pick different users here, and actually adjust their working hours, their availability, their time zone, et cetera, right? Because reps, like, ultimately, like, they're going to work out of their CRM, out of whatever they're prospecting out of, and then probably going to be on LinkedIn, right? And that's pretty much it. Maybe like one or two other tools, but logging into a routing tool to like toggle on vacation mode, probably not something that's going to happen. So we do also sync with the calendar. If people block off their calendar for vacation mode, we'll be able to sync that in. But on the queue side here for routing and whatnot, our approach is essentially letting you come in, sort of set the priority, meeting count, calibration, status, etc., and being able to toggle people on or off if they're on sort of like PTO or something else. So there are 2 different approaches you can take here. We're actually going super deep on additional routing functionality. So we're getting ready to roll out our own territory segments, geographies, teams, these as objects in default that you can use to not only do handle your inbound lead routing and general sort of account to rep assignment, but do a lot of other cool things as we sort of start to build out other pieces of the product.
That's really exciting, Nico, because we mostly work with companies that are looking to double or triple their growth year over year. And with that, comes massive investments in their sales teams. And we're typically redoing territories every time we bring in new reps. Um, and it doesn't really feel like territories have a home to live in. Um, would you see default as a place to manage what those territory definitions are and then use the routing to automate that workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. We, funny enough, territories we think are such an important part. Owning territories is, I think, what one of the really key parts that lets you sort of evolve into being a CRM as well. Because I think owning a lot of like lead and account data is good, but also like being able to manage and segment and organize the team and administer change across that team in the business logic that you have mapped in all these systems that depend on what that org kind of looks like is it's super underrated. So we're building a lot of new integrations and new capabilities with CRMs as like user type roles change in the CRM, being able to update people's position in a territory, moving them from one territory to another. Same thing with the HR systems as well. Being able to set custom rant periods and stuff like that in default for routing purposes and whatnot. So, a lot of really cool stuff coming there.
I mean, ideally, you'd open up your CRM and you'd be able to, like you said, hook up to your HRS. You have your team loaded up into your CRM. You'd already have all of your potential prospects with how much those are worth to your company loaded up in the CRM. And then if you could click a button, automatically it load balances all of those potential opportunities, prioritized by ICP. And then as those come inbound, route them to the right people to get going and set up the right outbound flows too. And that's ideal world. That's what we're mostly trying to do every single day. And it feels like we have to use 18 tools to pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'd love to also kind of talk about is like the how default sort of extends into some other sort of revenue workflow use cases. We see this as a really big one with companies who they might use like Salesforce flows, they might use Lean Data, they might use Zapier for like routing adjacent cases, especially with like CRM hygiene or other use cases. But this is a really big one and a common one that we've seen pretty often. And it literally just starts with the ability to route or automate a workflow based off of some new object being created in Salesforce. And what we're basically doing here is, on the back end, creating a Salesforce flow. So let's say, anytime a new lead comes in and, we're creating a Salesforce formula here, the sort of like lead source is partnerships, right? So I'm just going to say contains like partnerships, right? Being able to route this through the partnerships queue, right? And that's something we actually see default like trickling into more and more of these use cases as people build that business logic in. This is also why we're kind of doubling down on territories and segments and other really important sort of like business logic primitives. A lot of really cool stuff you can do here from that lens as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean the stack, like if you're using something like Clay, you need to orchestrate a lot of different systems. I think outbound's a really important use case that you would need something like default to be able to orchestrate. There's just a lot of systems. There's a lot of enrichment. There's a lot of waterfall logic. So it makes total sense. That's the stuff that we're trying to set up in Salesforce flows, and you guys have everything built in with Slack too. Because then that's a huge value. We're always trying to push stuff to Slack, but you can keep that in one single flow. So that stuff's really cool.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I had one more question, Nico, before we wrap up here.
Sure.
When do you feel like the pain is big enough and people are reaching out, and that's really when they need to bring default in? When does it feel like if this is happening at your company, you should consider default?
Yeah. I think we do have very small companies that use us. And they, we've seen some really interesting sort of success cases over the course of last year. One company, as an example, launched this January. So about 10 months ago, end of January, $0 of ARR. But they ran an incredible marketing campaign with billboards and going viral on Twitter and LinkedIn. And for about half of this year, I think the first half of this year, they didn't have a CRM. They just had default. as their inbound form, piping into Slack and adding meetings to Google Calendar. What ended up happening was, they built this really crazy workflow on default that was automating a lot of what the founders were doing at the time. And in about 6 months, they went from 0 to 5 million of ARR, five and a half, I think now of ARR, and in about 6 months, which is insane, right? Very, very strong growth. And as we were talking to the founders about this, before default, they'd been using like Typeform and Calendar. Is basically the same stack we were using at our last company. And what he said was like, default didn't help us get more leads, right? We don't control how many website visitors show up. We don't have anything to do with your traffic, right? And it's on you to create a good well-designed website. But what he mentioned was, if they hadn't had default, their sales cycles probably would have been a lot longer. And they probably would have dropped the ball on a lot more leads. So for about 2 months, the two co-founders had back-to-back meetings basically every day of the week, taking meetings on Saturdays as well. So I think like the moment there's sort of two scenarios, right? The first one is you have default right when things like start to go well, and you have an architecture, this sort of inbound funnel architecture that is built for conversions, not just in terms of form fill to meeting and for speed of lead, but also everything downstream of that. And the second one is usually like we hear everything that's sort of top of mind for every marketing leader right now, and every CRO is we need to grow faster, right? If you're like Series B, Series A, Series B, Series C, you're probably looking at 3x to 4x next year is probably your bull case, right? And the levers that you're probably looking at right now are probably spending a lot of money on ads or hiring a lot of reps. Hiring a lot of reps is tough given the sort of bottlenecks in outbound, right? There are a lot of like technical bottlenecks you really have to get through to make outbound work very well, especially if you're selling to other tech companies, right? If you're selling SMB, sort of mom and pop shops, you're going to do a great job on the phones and probably maybe with email as well. But if you're thinking about 3 to 4xing next year, you need to probably at least 3 to 4x what you're spending on marketing in your top channels and leave budget for experimentation, sort of testing new things out. Everyone is thinking about LinkedIn, especially in sort of paid search. Most of default's customers' meetings that have UTM parameters come from paid search, primarily Google. So I think that's a huge channel going into next year as well. I think we're going to see a lot of growth, but if you're thinking about how to 3 to 4x next year, I would probably recommend like talking to your RevOps team to see if your processes and your sort of tech stack is going to handle all of that, all that new traffic, all those new leads, et cetera, right? Because the chances are it's probably not, right? You want to have something that's a predictable growth engine that doesn't create a lot of funnel to pipeline loss or drag, right? And that's
Yep.
when people typically buy default.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think it fits our customer base for sure, and probably a lot of our audience as well. Well, Nico, this has been awesome. Really, really love the
Yeah.
strategy. Love the beachhead you're choosing to get a little bit deeper within the go-to-market organization. I think it's a huge need. It's a huge problem. You've done everything in a really elegant way that I know our customers would appreciate, and we really appreciate as well. So just want to thank you so much for sharing everything you're working on, sharing the vision, the founding story. And what's the best way to get a hold of you or for people to find you? You have a great domain. So
Yes.
hopefully it's easy for people
Yeah.
to find.
Yeah. My email is super easy to remember. It's just Nico @default.com. And if not there, then on LinkedIn, I'm a LinkedIn DM power user. So shoot me a DM or shoot me an email, and let's nerd out on RevOps and inbound stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nico.
Thanks so much, guys.
Appreciate it.